President and gentlemen, ladies of the House, standing here with 8 minutes in my hands and at this venerable and rather magnificent institution, I was going to assure you that I belong to the Henry VIII School of Public Speaking, that as Henry VIII said to his wives, I shall not keep you long. But now finding myself the seventh speaker out of 8 in what must already seem a rather long evening to you, I rather feel like Henry VIII's last wife. I more or less know what's expected of me, but I'm not sure how to do it any differently. Perhaps what I should do is really try and pay attention to the arguments that were advanced by the opposition today. We had, for example, Sir Richard Ottaway challenging the very idea that it could be argued that the economic situation of the colonies was actually worsened by the experience of British colonialism. Well, I stand to offer you the Indian example, Sir Richard. India's share of the world economy when Britain arrived on its shores was 23%. By the time the British left, it was down to below 4%. Why? Simply because India had been governed for the benefit of Britain. Britain's rise for 200 years was financed by its depredations in India. In fact, Britain's industrial revolution was actually premised upon the deindustrialization of India. The handloom weavers, for example, famed across the world, whose products were exported around the world, Britain came right in. There were actually these weavers making fine muslin, light as woven air, it was said. And Britain came right in, smashed their thumbs, broke their looms, imposed tariffs and duties on their cloth and products, and started, of course, taking the raw materials from India and shipping back manufactured cloth, flooding the world's markets with what became the products of the dark and satanic mills of Victorian England. That meant that the weavers in India became beggars, and India went from being a world-famous exporter of finished cloth into an importer, went from having 27% of world trade to less than 2%. Meanwhile, colonialists like Robert Clive bought their rotten boroughs in England on the proceeds of their loot in India, while taking the Hindi word loot into their dictionaries as well as their habits. And the British had the gall to call him Clive of India, as if he belonged to the country, when all he really did was to ensure that much of the country belonged to him. By the end of the 19th century, the fact is that India was already Britain's biggest cash cow, the world's biggest purchaser of British goods and exports, and the source of highly paid employment for British civil servants. We literally paid for our own oppression. And as has been pointed out, the wealthy Victorian British families that made their money out of the slave economy, 1/5 of the elites of the wealthy class in Britain in the 19th century owed their money to transporting 3 million Africans across the waters. And in fact, in 1833, when slavery was abolished, what happened was that a compensation of £20 million was paid, not as reparations to those who had lost their lives or who had suffered or been oppressed by slavery, but to those who had lost their property. I was struck by the fact that your Wi-Fi password at this union commemorates the name of Mr. Gladstone, the great liberal hero. Well, I'm sorry, his family was one of those who benefited from this compensation. Staying with India, between 15 and 29 million Indians died of starvation in British-induced famines. The most famous example, of course, was the Great Bengal Famine during the Second World War, when 4 million people died because Winston Churchill, deliberately as a matter of written minuted policy, proceeded to divert essential supplies from civilians in Bengal to sturdy Tommies and Europeans as reserve stockpiles. He said that the starvation of anyway underfed Bengalis mattered much less than that of sturdy Greeks. This is Churchill's actual quote. And when conscience-stricken British officials wrote to him, pointing out that people were dying because of this decision, he peevishly wrote in the margins of the file, "Why hasn't Gandhi died yet?" So all notions that the British were trying to do their colonial enterprise out of enlightened despotism, to try and bring the benefits of colonialism and civilization to the benighted heathen. I'm sorry, Churchill's conduct in 43, simply one example of many that gave a lie to this myth. As others have said on the proposition, violence and racism were the reality of the colonial experience. And no wonder that the sun never set on the British Empire, because even God couldn't trust the English in the dark. Let me take World War I as a very concrete example, since the first speaker, Mr. Lee, suggested these things couldn't be quantified. Well, let me quantify World War I for you. Again, I'm sorry, from an Indian perspective, others have spoken of other countries. 1/6 of all the British forces that fought in the war were Indian. 54,000 Indians actually lost their lives in that war. 65,000 were wounded. Another 4,000 remained missing or in prison. Indian taxpayers had to cough up £100 million in that time's money. India supplied 70 million rounds of ammunition, 600,000 rifles and machine guns, 42 million garments were stitched and sent out of India, and 1.3 million Indian personnel served in this war. I know all this because, of course, the commemoration of the centenary has just taken place. But not just that, India had to supply 173,000 animals, 370 million tons of supplies, and in the end, the total value of everything that was taken out of India, India, by the way, suffering from recession at that time and poverty and hunger, was, in today's money, £8 billion. You want quantification? It's available. Second World War, it was even worse, 2.5 million Indians in uniform. I won't belabor the point, but of Britain's total war debt of £3 billion, in 1945 money, 1.25 billion was owed to India and never actually paid. Somebody mentioned Scotland. Well, the fact is that colonialism actually cemented your union with Scotland. You know, the Scots had actually tried to send colonies out before 1707. They'd all failed, I'm sorry to say. But then, of course, came union, and India was available, and there you had a disproportionate employment of Scots. I'm sorry, Mr. Mackenzie has to speak after me. Engaged in this colonial enterprise as soldiers, as merchants, as agents, as employees, and the earnings from India is what brought prosperity to Scotland, even pulled Scotland out of poverty. Now that India is no longer there, no wonder the bonds are loosening. Now, we've heard other arguments on this side. There's been a mention of the railways. Well, let me tell you, first of all, as my colleague, the Jamaican High Commissioner, has pointed out, railways and roads were really built to serve British interests and not those of the local people. But I might add that many countries have built railways and roads without having had to be colonized in order to do so. They were designed to carry raw materials from the hinterland into the ports to be shipped to Britain. And the fact is that the Indian or Jamaican or other colonial public, their needs were incidental. Transportation, there was no attempt made to match supply to demand for mass transport, none whatsoever. Instead, in fact, the Indian railways were built with massive incentives offered by Britain to British investors, guaranteed out of Indian taxes paid by Indians, with the result that you actually had 1 mile of Indian railway costing twice what it cost to build the same mile in Canada or Australia, because there was so much money being paid in extravagant returns. Britain made all the profits, controlled the technology, supplied all the equipment, and absolutely all these benefits came as private enterprise, British private enterprise, at public risk, Indian public risk. That was the railways as an accomplishment. We're hearing about aid. I think it was again Sir Richard Ottaway who mentioned British aid to India. Well, let me just point out that British aid to India is about 0.4% of India's GDP. The government of India actually spends more on fertilizer subsidies, which might be an appropriate metaphor for that argument. If I may point out as well, that as my fellow speakers from the proposition have pointed out, there have been incidents of racial violence, of loot, of massacres, of bloodshed, of transportation, in India's case, even of one of our last Mughal emperor. Yes, maybe today's Britons are not responsible for some of these depredations, but the same speakers have pointed with pride to their foreign aid. You're not responsible for the people starving in Somalia, but you give them aid. Surely the principle of reparations for the wrongs that have been done cannot be denied. It's been pointed out, for example, the dehumanization of Africans in the Caribbean, the massive psychological damage that has been done, the undermining of social traditions, of property rights, of the authority structures of these societies, all in the interests of British colonialism. And the fact remains that many of today's problems in these countries, including the persistence, in some cases the creation of racial and ethnic and religious tensions, were the direct result of the colonial experience. So there is a moral debt that needs to be paid. Someone challenged reparations elsewhere. Well, I'm sorry, Germany doesn't just give reparations to Israel. It also gave reparations to Poland. Perhaps some of the speakers here are too young to remember the dramatic picture of Chancellor Willy Brandt on his knees in the Warsaw Ghetto in 1970. And there are other examples. There is Italy's reparations to Libya. There's Japan's to Korea. Even Britain has paid reparations to the New Zealand Maoris. So it's not as if this is something unprecedented or unheard of that's going to somehow open some sort of nasty Pandora's box. No wonder Professor Lewis reminded us that he's from Texas. There's a wonderful expression in Texas that summarizes the arguments of the opposition: all hat and no cattle. Now, if I can just quickly look through the other notes I was scribbling while they were speaking, there was reference to democracy and rule of law. Let me say with the greatest possible respect, it's a bit rich to oppress, enslave, kill, torture, maim people for 200 years and then celebrate the fact that they're democratic at the end of it. We were denied democracy, sir. We had to snatch it, seize it from you. With the greatest reluctance, it was conceded in India's case after 150 years of British rule, and that too with limited franchise. Yes, indeed, ma'am.
The opposition spoke quite highly of Greek and Athenian democracy on which the West should pride itself, and spoke of liberty and equality in that same name. The Athenian democracy was only functioning because of the slave society on which it was built. That's the nature of colonisation.
All right, I don't think that needs contradiction, not from me at any rate. But if I may just point out, I think the argument made by a couple of the speakers, the first speaker, Mr. Lee in particular, conceded all the evil atrocities of colonialism, but essentially suggested that reparations won't really help. They won't help the right people. They'll be used as a propaganda tool. They'll embolden people like Mr. Mugabe. It's always nice how in the old days, I'm sorry to say that the people of the Caribbean used to frighten their children into behaving and sleeping by saying Sir Francis Drake would come after them. That was a legacy of that. Now it's Mugabe will be there. So this is the new sort of Sir Francis Drake of our times. The fact is very simply, sir, that we are not talking about reparations as a tool to empower anybody. They're a tool for you to atone for the wrongs that have been done. And I am quite prepared to accept the proposition that you can't put a monetary sum on the kinds of horrors people have suffered. Certainly no amount of money can expiate the loss of a loved one, as somebody pointed out there. You're not going to be able to figure out an exact amount, but the principle is what matters. The fact is that to speak blithely of sacrifices on both sides, as an analogy was used here, a burglar comes into your house, ransacks the place, stubs his toe, and you say, well, there was a sacrifice on both sides. That, I'm sorry to say, is not an acceptable argument. The truth is that we are not arguing specifically that vast sums of money need to be paid. The proposition before this House is the principle of owing reparations, not the fine points of how much is owed, to whom it should be paid. The question is there a debt? Does Britain owe reparations? As far as I'm concerned, the ability to acknowledge a wrong that has been done, to simply say sorry will go a far, far, far longer way than some percentage of GDP in the form of aid. What is required, it seems to me, is accepting the principle that reparations are owed. Personally, I'd be quite happy if it was £1 a year for the next 200 years after the last 200 years of Britain and India. Thank you very much, Madam President.
When I was a kid, the disaster we worried about most was a nuclear war. That's why we had a barrel like this down in our basement, filled with cans of food and water. When the nuclear attack came, we were supposed to go downstairs, hunker down, and eat out of that barrel. Today, the greatest risk of global catastrophe doesn't look like this. Instead, it looks like this. If anything kills over 10 million people in the next few decades, it's most likely to be a highly infectious virus rather than a war. Not missiles, but microbes. Now, part of the reason for this is that we have invested a huge amount in nuclear deterrence, but we've actually invested very little in a system to stop an epidemic. We're not ready for the next epidemic. Let's look at Ebola. I'm sure all of you read about it in the newspaper. Lots of tough challenges. I followed it carefully through the case analysis tools we use to track polio eradication. And as you look at what went on, the problem wasn't that there was a system that didn't work well enough. The problem was that we didn't have a system at all. In fact, there are some pretty obvious key missing pieces. We didn't have a group of epidemiologists ready to go who would have gone, seen what the disease was, see how far it had spread. The case reports came in on paper. It was very delayed before they were put online, and they were extremely inaccurate. We didn't have a medical team ready to go. We didn't have a way of preparing people. Now, Médecins Sans Frontières did a great job orchestrating volunteers, but even so, we were far slower than we should have been getting the thousands of workers into these countries. And a large epidemic would require us to have hundreds of thousands of workers. There was no one there to look at treatment approaches, no one to look at the diagnostics, no one to figure out what tools should be used. As an example, we could have taken the blood of survivors, processed it, and put that plasma back in people to protect them. But that was never tried. So there was a lot that was missing, and these things are really a global failure. The WHO is funded to monitor epidemics, but not to do these things I talked about. Now in the movies, it's quite different. there's a group of handsome epidemiologists ready to go. They move in, they save the day, but that's just pure Hollywood. The failure to prepare could allow the next epidemic to be dramatically more devastating than Ebola. Let's look at the progression of Ebola over this year. About 10,000 people died, and nearly all were in the 3 West African countries. There's 3 reasons why it didn't spread more. The first is there was a lot of heroic work by the health workers. They found the people and they prevented more infections. The second is the nature of the virus. Ebola does not spread through the air. And by the time you're contagious, most people are so sick that they're bedridden. Third, it didn't get into many urban areas, and that was just luck. If it had gotten into a lot more urban areas, the case numbers would have been much larger. So next time, we might not be so lucky. You can have a virus where people feel well enough while they're infectious that they get on a plane or they go to a market. The source of the virus could be a natural epidemic like Ebola, or it could be bioterrorism. And so there are things that would literally make things 1,000 times worse. In fact, let's look at a model of a virus spread through the air like the Spanish flu back in 1918. So here's what would happen. It would spread throughout the world very, very quickly. And you can see there's over 30 million people die from that epidemic. So this is a serious problem. We should be concerned. But in fact, we can build a really good response system. We have the benefits of all the science and technology that we talk about here. We've got cell phones to get information from the public and get information out to them. We have satellite maps where we can see where people are and where they're moving. We have advances in biology that should dramatically change the turnaround time to look at a pathogen and be able to make drugs and vaccines that fit for that pathogen. So we can have tools, but those tools need to be put into an overall global health system, and we need preparedness. The best lessons, I think, on how to get prepared are, again, what we do for war. For soldiers, we have full-time waiting to go. We have reserves that can scale us up to large numbers. NATO has a mobile unit that can deploy very rapidly. NATO does a lot of war games to check, are people well-trained? Do they understand about fuel and logistics and the same radio frequencies? So they are absolutely ready to go. So those are the kinds of things we need to deal with an epidemic. What are the key pieces? First is we need strong health systems in poor countries. That's where mothers can give birth safely, kids can get all their vaccines, but also where we'll see the outbreak very early on. We need a medical reserve corps, lots of people who've got the training and background who are ready to go with the expertise. And then we need to pair those medical people with the military, taking advantage of the military's ability to move fast, do logistics, and secure areas. We need to do simulations, germ games, not war games, so that we see where the holes are. The last time a germ game was done in the United States was back in 2001, and it didn't go so well. So far, the score is germs 1, people 0. Finally, we need lots of advanced R&D in areas of vaccines and diagnostics. There are some big breakthroughs, like adeno-associated virus, that could work very, very quickly. Now, I don't have an exact budget for what this would cost, but I'm quite sure it's very modest compared to the potential harm. The World Bank estimates that if we have a worldwide flu epidemic, global wealth will go down by over $3 trillion, and we'd have millions and millions of deaths. These investments offer significant benefits beyond just being ready for the epidemic. The primary health care, the R&D, those things would reduce global health equity and make the world more just as well as more safe. So I think this should absolutely be a priority. There's no need to panic. We don't have to hoard cans of spaghetti or go down into the basement, but we need to get going because time is not on our side. In fact, if there's one positive thing that can come out of the Ebola epidemic, it's that it can serve as an early warning, a wake-up call to get ready. If we start now, we can be ready for the next epidemic. Thank you.
Good morning, sir. Good morning, guests. Welcome to on this platform. This is Dr. Rashmi Mori speaking. Am I audible?
Yes, but not loud enough.
Okay. So we are waiting for another two guests to join, and thereby we will begin.
Okay.
Okay.
Madam, you have to be a bit louder. I think it's pretty hard to hear.
Sure. I'll do that, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, a very good morning to respected Director Sir, Deputy Director Sir, our guests, faculty members, and all the student managers. I, Palak Dubey, welcome you to Infinite Team's annual panel discussion, Stratagem. The topic for this year's panel discussion is COVID-19, the black swan of global economy, how it impacts India's 5 trillion economy goal. I would like to take the honor of introducing our Director, Sir, Brigadier Dr. Rajiv Divekar. He has a very distinguished career in the Indian Army and then in academics. He is a recipient of Rajiv Gandhi Education Excellence Award, Rashtriya Vidya Gaurav Medal, Gold Medal, and Education Leadership Award. Sir, in his directorship, has made SIMS rated amongst the best B schools in India. Now, moving forward, let me introduce the distinguished panel members of today's event. Firstly, I take the pleasure to introduce Dr. Brinda Jagirdar. She is an independent director and senior business economist, having PhD and MS in economics. She has served as general manager and chief economist in State Bank of India. She was a member of Monetary Policy Group of Indian Bank Associations and was also associated with Raghuram Rajan Committee on Financial Sector Reforms in India. Welcome, ma'am. Further, it gives me immense pleasure to introduce our next guest, Mr. Rajiv Mantri, an alumnus of Columbia Business School and having a rich experience of over 16 years. Sir is the managing director of Navam Capital, a co-founder of Biome Therapeutics, director of GPSK Investment Group and co-founder and trustee of Indian Enterprise Council. Sir has been a contributing editor at Forbes Wolf, Emerging Tech Report, and Vice President of NU Nano Alliance. I welcome you, sir. Next, we have with us Mr. Harsh Gupta Madhusudan. Sir is a public market investor who firmly believes that 2020s will be the long India decade. Presently, he is the Chief Investment Officer at Ashika Group of Companies. Sir has earlier worked for Bain & Company on due diligence for private equity and hedge fund client, amongst others. He is also a CFA and certified FRM. Welcome, sir. Further, it gives me immense pleasure to introduce our next guest, Mr. Rakesh Singhania. With an experience of over 36 years in the industry of an alumnus of St. Xavier's College, Sir is presently the Chief Financial Officer at Wells Fargo India. He was a Vice President and CFO at Cambridge Solutions Limited. Earlier, he had served as SVP Finance in Polaris Software Private Lab Limited and as a treasurer in the Assam Company Limited. I welcome you, sir. Next, we have another distinguished guest with us, Mr. Arun Karna. Sir is currently Managing Director and CEO at AT&T Global Network Services. With an experience of over 30 years in IT telecom industry and with his rich knowledge base, he has mentored and led many teams effectively during his service. Welcome, sir. With all these eminent personalities, we also have Dr. Hemant Thakur as our moderator. He is the CEO of Education Belt, a training advisory consultancy. He has over 19 years of versatile experience in the field of international taxation and information technology. He has earned PhD in psychology and CPA degree from USA. Currently, Sir is a popular faculty member at SIMS. Welcome, sir. And now may I request Brigadier Dr. Rajiv Divekar, Director of SIMS, to say a few words and declare the panel discussion open. So please. I'm so sorry, sir, but you are on mute.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Palak. A very good morning to all our esteemed panelists, to our moderator, Dr. Hemant Thakur, to our faculty, Dr. Rashmi More, and transformational student leaders of the batch 2020-2022. Well, it's a very interesting topic and certainly calls for a debate. Now, we all know that in 2007, India became a US $1 trillion economy. And then we grew rapidly such that in the next 7 years, we became a US $2 trillion economy. And we moved up to the 5th spot ahead of France and UK and just behind US, China, Germany, and Japan. Last year, Indian economy, even though the growth wasn't as expected, was at US $2.8 trillion. Now, PM Modi had declared that India aspires to reach a US $5 trillion economy by 2025. Now, though difficult, it was felt that it was achievable in case India grew at over 10% each year. However, instead of growing, India's growth fell to 6.5% in 2019 and continued its downward trend thereafter. And then COVID struck and the whole economic scenario changed. The economic impact of 2020 coronavirus pandemic in India has been largely disruptive. India's growth in the fourth quarter of the fiscal year 2020 went down to 3.1% according to our Ministry of Statistics. The chief economic advisor to the government of India said that this drop is mainly due to coronavirus pandemic effect on the Indian economy. The World Bank and rating agencies had initially revised India's growth for financial year 2021 with the lowest figures India has seen in 3 decades since India's economic liberalization in the 1990s. However, after the announcement of the economic package in mid-May, India's GDP estimates were downgraded even more to negative figures, signaling a deep recession. And as we all know, on 1st September 2020, the Ministry of Statistics released the GDP figures for the quarter, April to June financial year 21, which showed a contraction of 24% as the same period the year before. Unemployment rose from 6.7% to 26% in April and then back down to pre-lockdown levels by mid-June. During the lockdown, an estimated 14 crore, that is 140 million people lost employment, while salaries were cut for many others. More than 45% of households across the nation have reported an income drop as compared to the previous year. The Indian economy was expected to lose over 32,000 crores, that is US $4.5 billion every day during first 21 days of complete lockdown, which was declared following the coronavirus outbreak. Now, under complete lockdown, less than a quarter of India's 2.8 trillion economic movement was functional. Developing countries like India have more fragile economic and social fabric, and the present situation create more suffering for the unorganized sectors and migrant labor. The country is facing an extraordinary challenging time in this financial year. India has to urgently find a way to cushion the demand side shocks induced by potential lockdowns and other ongoing containment measures. The downward trend of the economy has to be arrested, and India has to get out of recession before it gets worse. India's dream of reaching US $5 trillion economy by 2025 now seems impossible, if not a distant dream. India will have to revise the timeline. To throw some light on this, we have 6 stalwarts from the industry with huge experience. They will be able to share their views and opinions on this issue so that you get a clear perspective. With this, I extend a very warm welcome to our esteemed panelists, Dr. Brinda Jagirdar, Mr. Arun Khanna, Mr. Rajiv Mantri, Mr. Rakesh Singhania, Mr. Harsh Gupta Madhusudan, and of course our moderator, our very own Dr. Hemant Thakkar. I'm sure this will be a very informative and invigorating session from which there will be a lot of learning and takeaways. It's a great start to the academic year and to your 2-year MBA. With that said, I now wish the event all the very best, and since you wanted me to say, declare the event open.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for your opening remarks for the event and declaring it open. Now, to begin with, may I request my team members to share a small video to understand the theme.
अर्थव्यवस्था को $5 ट्रिलियन तक का विस्तार देना, $5 ट्रिलियन इकोनॉमी का लक्ष्य एक नए युग की शुरुआत हुई है.
Tonight, the first confirmed case of novel coronavirus reported from Kerala.
India has now reported 4th death linked to coronavirus.
Now, India now has the 4th highest number of coronavirus deaths in the world.
Q1 GDP figures have been released. We've been waiting for it all day. GDP has contracted by 23.9%. This is huge news coming in on the back of COVID and its after effects.
Thank you, team. Now, may I request Dr. Hemant Thakkar to take over the dais for the further proceedings. Sir, all yours.
Thank you so much. I welcome you all and all the distinguished panel member, the very own renowned Brigadier, Dr. Diveka sir. Thank you so much for having me. Rashmi madam, always you are having new topics like this. And I will not talk much on the economy. We have the great stalwarts from the industry. So I will directly start talking about whenever we have such type of events about the economy, there is always a distress in India. And always year on year, we keep on talking about, we keep on asking the questions, are we going to do good? Are we going to be a developed nation very soon? Right from the third world nation towards the transition towards the developed nation. Now, the very first thing what comes to my mind, it's not about the 5 trillion. Are we even going to hold at 2 trillion? Because the pandemic is ever increasing and the numbers are constantly going up. And it is really challenging for all the manufacturing sectors, including automobiles, We have the real estate collapsing. We have all the industries which are having the negative growth rate. So I will request the panel members to talk on 2 to 3 minutes on this topic, and then I will start asking the question. First, I will request our honorable panelist, Dr. Brinda Jagirdar, to make an opening statement on this panel. Over to you, ma'am.
Brinda ma'am, are you able to hear us?
I guess.
Yes, yes. Okay. I'm
yes,
sorry. I didn't realize I was on mute. So, and my video was also not on. I didn't realize. Sorry. Okay. So now, yes, I agree that all what you have said is absolutely right. That we have now come to a stage where our GDP is actually contracted much sharper than global GDP. But then we were already in a contraction mode before COVID came in. And second thing, the sectors, Indian economy is largely a services dominated sector. 60% of GDP comes from services sector. So all the sectors that have been really badly impacted are the services sector: trade, entertainment, hospitality, travel, all these, aviation accordingly. So all these have been hotels, these have been very badly hit, and these are also employment intensive. So that is one spot from where we are getting such a strong hit. The second point I want to mention is that the 5 trillion aim that you have mentioned. This is not really impossible. Remember, it took us why does it seem impossible? Because it took us 60 years to get to 1 trillion. So therefore, now we think it is impossible. But then from there, in the next 8 years, we doubled, and then it has doubled, and then jumped again to 3 trillion, almost 3 trillion. So it's not as if it is not doable. It is very doable. What we need to do is put our policies in place. And let me tell you, can we do it? My answer is unequivocally yes. Why is it yes? Because look at the kind of economy we are in. Let me just quote some data from here now. Sure. The kind of economy that you have inherited. Actually, you are very lucky that you have inherited such an economy. We are today self-sufficient in food. Please give me 2 minutes. Huh? We are today self-sufficient in food. In 1965, we had to import food. PL 480 experts, you people would not have heard of it also. Now, this was shipped to mouth. We would get food from outside, and only then we would be able to feed our population. But that's when some wrong, far-sighted policymakers decided that we need to have a green revolution. And after that, today, India is a food exporting country. We are the second largest producer of rice and wheat. We had second largest producer of the fruits and vegetables, and the largest producer of milk. So even in this COVID lockdown, Amul did not stop supplies. None of the milk companies suffered, or they didn't suffer any setback. They could collect the produce, they could distribute. So that went on very smoothly. And we also produce 50% of the world's tea. So we are a large economy. We are self-sufficient in food, and that's a very, very big plus. The second is we have a largest TV network, largest number of films, and of course, the largest road and railway network, the fourth largest railway network, and the largest road network in the world. Then we have the highest remittances, which come mainly from the Gulf, more than about 70 plus billion dollars every year, which is the highest in the world. Then our auto industry, as you mentioned, yes, it is in trouble now. It is the 7th largest. But remember, we also have new launches. Companies like Kia, for example, have been doing very well. And some of the companies have also restarted production, and they said that their two-wheeler and tractor production this year is higher than last year. So then, of course, we have 11 out of 12 diamonds in the world are polished in India. Then we have our capability in space technology. We are among the 5 to 6 nations in the world which belong to the Space Club. And we're the 4th nation with ASAT technology. We also have, remember, you can't forget Mangalyaan, and you can't forget we almost reached the moon. The Vikram lander was almost there. And we have an ambition to put a man on the moon. And then we also commercially launch other nations' satellites. And we have the lightest satellite in the world was manufactured by India. And India is the 5th country to launch its own GPS by ISRO. This is better than Google. It has a much better clarity. Then we're the 3rd largest country in terms of tech startup. Now, RBI has said that startups are part of priority sector, so they will also be able to get funds from within the country. They won't have to look for PE funds from outside. And the valuation by startups also, Reserve Bank has said that banks need not look in for another second opinion on valuation. If the startup is giving you a valuation, take it. So that's again, it's opened up a lot of space for growth. We are among the top 20 countries in artificial intelligence. And in terms of India, in terms of the innovation index, India has moved up from 81 in 2015. Gradually, in 2020, we now stand at 48 in the world. And 96% of this is my last point, 96% of the country is covered by internet network. 100% electrification is done. We have the JAM Trinity for financial inclusion. And with almost 1 billion Aadhaar, bank account, and mobile, we have a lot of possibilities. And my last point is we can do it.
I can see the optimistic views, and I can very well, I know this is the opening statement, madam, but can we say predominantly that agriculture has the positive growth rate? When we see the last day's figures, the agriculture is one who can rescue the Indian economy, and it can go from 2.5 to 5 trillion, maybe not 2015, but probably in next 4 or 5 financial year. What's your take on this, ma'am?
Absolutely, you hit the nail on the head. When China started its economic reforms in 1978, the first thing they did was look at agriculture. We missed that. We went to industry and we started looking at other sectors. We should have really tackled agriculture right up front. But that time it was felt that agriculture is a state subject, so maybe we would leave the initiative to the states. But you are absolutely right. That is where growth is coming from. And now the new initiative, farmer producer organizations and farmer producer cooperatives. In these cooperatives, 75% of the farmers have to be small farmers, that is less than 2 hectares of holding. So these, and you have already started seeing, I can see in this lockdown, we are able to get direct produce from Nasik, from Pune, from all these places in Mumbai, directly to these small farmers who are producing and selling to the consumers instead of going through the APMC, which has been abolished.
Yes.
So therefore, these steps will definitely help. Agriculture, it not only provides food, it also provides demand. So therefore, you have two-wheeler industry, demand going up, tractor demand going up. And not only that, we have demand for all other commodities. I mean, maybe later, I'm taking up too much time, I'm sorry, but maybe we can elaborate later. That the demand coming in from the agriculture sector is really sustaining the growth. So yes, you are absolutely right. Agriculture will have, it provides raw material to industry and it provides demand also for industry.
Okay. Honored to hear you, ma'am. We welcome you for this panel discussion. Rakesh sir, your take on this, just a couple of minutes, sir.
Sorry about that. Good morning, everybody. I know, thank you, ma'am, for your very optimistic sort of comments, opening comments. But being a finance person, I'm a bit more pessimistic and skeptical about the whole, the economy. To me, of course, we will reach a $5 trillion economy at some point of time, obviously. The question is whether we'll do it over the next 4 or 5 years or it'll take much longer. To me, I personally feel that it'll take much longer unless the policymakers, which includes the government, the regulators, etc., all put their acts behind and make it easier for the business or the environment to survive. I think what is happening is the regulators, for whatever reasons, historic or otherwise, are not made a consistent business environment for the businesses to grow. And if you look at, the policy changes, and if I look at purely on the taxation front as a rationalization, we've got to and fro on taxes. The GST is a typical example on that. So is the direct taxes. We take 2 steps forward, but sometimes we take 3 steps backward, and which doesn't encourage the businesses to grow, or rather the private organizations not to really invest in the Indian economy. And I think this sort of, attitude is a stronger word, but this sort of, the environment will have to change from that perspective. We will have to enable the businesses to come in and provide employment to the opportunity. Then you spoke about agricultural reforms, and absolutely, I mean, there are tons and tons of sectors where agricultural reform, the reforms need to be there. Agriculture is one. I think the government has made some steps towards it this year. We'll have to wait and see how they're implemented. I think the implementation is one of the biggest challenges in India. We come up with some fabulous policy, but when it comes to execution and implementation, we always falter there. And somewhere reforms, if I take on the factor side, say specifically labor reforms, is extremely important. Now, when I talk about reforms, it doesn't mean that we don't have to have any laws there. I mean, I think some of the state governments in the pandemic time suddenly said, oh, none of the labor laws are going to be applicable to that particular state. That doesn't work, because then it'll lead to huge amount of exploitation. So I think those sort of reforms are highly important. We will have to make sure that we provide enough capital, we provide enough money or enough incentives to the businesses to come and invest into India. The other part I would say is even in the financial sector, reforms are an extremely important part, because unless we are able to, and there are a lot of financial experts in this, I'm sure they will be able to elaborate much more in this area. But I mean, do we really need 12 public sector banks? In an area where all the private sector banks have jumped up and raised capital, none of the public sector banks have even thought about how to raise capital. So, and why are the regulators really shying away from providing more and more, license to the private sector banks? Of course, you need a risk framework. And some of the private sector banks have not done well from a governance perspective, from a risk management perspective, but those are the supervisory, requirements of a regulator. And I think those sort of things, enough capital, enough sort of reforms, enough incentives for the industries to come and put up industries and in the country are going to be thing. There are capital waiting in the world to come and invest. I mean, simple reason the regulators and the policymakers have to think through is, why is countries like Vietnam and Bangladesh, a very small country, Bangladesh was nothing compared to India, are getting huge amount of investments, and India can't attract that investment. But I think the silver lining, there are a couple of silver linings, I think, here. One is the Indian regulators and the government always acts when its backs is to the wall. So there are some reforms being taken place. I think the other aspect which has also happened during the pandemic style is really digitization of the economy to a large extent.
Absolutely. Yes.
Most of the corporates were absolutely caught unaware of the pandemic. They were just not resilient enough to understand how to cope up with it. But over the last few months, they have, I think, understood how to cope up with things. They become more resilient. A lot of areas where we would have never thought that we could do something through the digital mapping, those companies have really, come forward and allowed the digital way of reaching out to the customers, the vendors, and so on.
Yeah.
So these are some of the thoughts which I have. Yeah.
Sorry. So are you sensing that there is a possibility that to balance this, the imbalance of the revenue for the country? So are you sensing that there would be increase in the levy of taxes of GST and DTI, direct taxes, to balance that GTR?
I hope the government doesn't retort to that. And I hope the bureaucrats do not advise the government on that front, because I think it will be extremely counterproductive, to do it. I see the government's finances have gone haywire, and the government have no choice except to figure out how to handle that, right? I think, if I look at it, the central government really lays down the policies in India, but the action happens at the ground level in the states. So all this tussle on the GST, which is right now happening on the finances side, somewhere some compromise will have to be made, because if the money doesn't reach out to the states, there is no way our economy can kickstart.
Point taken. Yeah. Arun sir, your takes, couple of minutes, sir.
Sure. Thank you. So first of all, extremely honored and humbled to be speaking to all of you on this platform today in such elite company. I'm not an economist, so probably not too good with my statistics and numbers or the macro view. I run a technology company, and some of my views are sort of slanted from what I've seen in the industry and the immediate ecosystem of the industry itself. But interesting topic and interesting choice of topic and how you worded the topic itself. Black Swan event. So that got my curiosity going because it forced me to sort of go back and look for the actual definition of what is a Black Swan event. So, and I'm reading. I found this on the web. I'm sure some of you would have also read it like I'm doing. So a Black Swan event is being described as an unprecedented event that is beyond what is normally expected of a situation and has potentially severe consequences. Now, so far, so good. But what it goes on to say is it is characterized by three sort of properties. One is extremely rare. Second is severe impact. And the third is then in hindsight, everyone says that we should have seen it coming. So those are the three characteristics of a Black Swan event. So if we sort of take the situation and we sort of put it through those three filters, so extremely rare, this is unprecedented. I don't think the world has ever seen anything of this kind. Having severe impact, absolutely, as you heard, the eminent speakers before me say, obviously it is having a severe impact globally on many counts. Third is, was it obvious in hindsight? Could we have seen it coming and could we have planned for it? I don't think I have a clear answer for that, for example. I don't think so. For example, sure, there have been earlier outbreaks. There was SARS, there was MERS, there was even Ebola. But I don't think they were anywhere as close in terms of being so widespread, so severe, so devious, if I may call it, and so deadly. So I come from an industry which prides itself on meticulous business continuity planning and disaster recovery readiness. Because that's how we survive as an industry. But I can tell you as an insider that none of us, when we created those disaster scenarios or business continuity contingencies, we would have ever imagined something like this. We never did. So, that's call it a confession, call it whatever. And I think some of the earlier speakers also, especially Singhania ji alluded to the fact that, sort of caught unawares, but then caught on. So is it all gloom and doom though? I doubt it. I think I would say it's a mixed scenario, and I'm forever the optimist as a business person. So, look at the IT industry itself. So, yes, the IT industry, the knowledge industry, the larger knowledge industry, let us call it, was caught unawares, but it really scrambled almost immediately to enable work from home for all of its employees, almost 100% in a matter of days. So starting from a position where you are sort of shocked and awestruck to recovering and then enabling business to get up on wheels and running and almost as the same efficiency as the pre-COVID strike, I think we can, take pride, in that. And the Indian IT industry is second to none in that. And let me call it the larger knowledge industry, not just the IT industry. Okay? So everyone is, I believe, now coming to terms with the fact that this is not going to be a short-term thing, right? So this is going to be around, I think, for the foreseeable future. People will have been talking about a new normal. The only thing is the definition of new normal has been changing as we've gone along. So now the new term is never normal. And what is never normal is, I think it is a realization now that, things will never be the same again. So let's not even sort of hope for that. Let's look at ways to get on with it. Just get on with it. How do we now pivot ourselves from being struck with this gloom and doom scenario? How do we start recovering? How do we first ensure survival and then move from the survivor mode to a growth and thriving mode? So we are seeing a lot of that sentiment emerging in at least in our industry and our user industries, if I may call it. Some of those that Dr. Brinda, you mentioned, yes, some of those verticals are in distress: automotive industry, the travel tourism industry, the overall hospitality industry. In right now, yes, of course, they are struggling, but they are also fighting back in some way. They are looking to pivot. They are looking to find what I would call opportunities in adversity. That is the sentiment that is now coming through now, and that is what gives me hope. So absolutely, I don't. No one believes not that we'll hit 5 trillion by 2025. That even to hope for that, you might be an ever optimist, but even to hope for that is unrealistic. Let's come to terms with it. But then how do we actually get back on growth path? And we are seeing a lot of that sentiment in the industry. Let me quote, Charles Darwin here, and I'm quoting again. He said, "It is not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change." Of course, he was talking about the survival of species. I would say it is equally true of businesses today. So businesses who have the ability to sense and adapt from their operating environment and make those quick pivots while operating at full speed will survive, will thrive. And frankly, we have seen a lot of that evidence of sense and adapt approach in some segments. I can name them, and it's no surprise to anyone here, I'm sure. So you think of edtech or edutech, if you may call it. You take fintech, for example, or health tech and healthcare combined. That we are seeing a lot of innovation on the fly in response to the specific situation. And I would say all those are positive signs because I would tell you this business to a large extent is also sentiment driven. Yes, there are hard facts to contend, but if you are in the sort of right frame of mind, things do happen. So those are sort of my opening comments, and we can discuss a little bit more about
Absolutely.
how Sense and Adapt is working in various industries and what we are seeing from the enterprise segment in terms of priorities. We can talk later in the
Yeah, thank you so much for your comments. I'm sure after 6 months or 1 year, the analysts will not come and saying, we anticipated this.
Absolutely.
Rajiv, sir, over to you. Can you just share your views? Rajiv, sir.
Kindly unmute, sir.
Yeah, I was saying thank you for having me. Delighted to participate on this panel. We're talking about the economy. So I also want to present a book which my co-author, who's also here with me, Harsh Gupta Madhusudan, and I have co-authored. This book is about modern India, and we will be covering many of the topics that are being debated here today. So just a sort of small presentation of the book there before I jump into the economic sort of thoughts that I have. So I would say the challenge for India as we venture into the post-COVID world will, primarily maybe hinge on 4 fronts. 2 of them are kind of requiring urgent sort of attention. And those 2 I would highlight first as financial sector reform. I think one of the other panelists also talked about that. And the second one is providing the appropriate support to MSMEs. So on financial sector reform, we've seen a major change in India last 4 years. We've seen tremendous bank consolidation. We've seen the insolvency bankruptcy code coming in on the debt side. And that's kind of played a major role in cleaning up the kind of malpractices that were prevailing in the banking world. So where do we go from here? So, number of banks have come down from 27 to 12 now. And there is talk of bank privatization happening. So I think there is a need to keep pushing forward on this. These are important structural reforms in credit extension, in how capital is allocated in the Indian economy. So there is a real need to sort of push forward on this, and privatization is a big part of it, because without banks being in private control, those malpractices which created this problem can creep back in. So once there is better alignment of interests, with better alignment of interests between borrowers, bank owners, managers, and regulators, I think maybe these problems will not repeat themselves. So I think treading on that path of financial sector reform is a very important move forward. Second is support to MSMEs. Obviously, as we all know, the micro and small enterprises have been particularly badly hit by this event. So while we are addressing the issues on the credit side, there is a need to kind of provide certain protection to some of the MSMEs, because if we don't do that, then maybe getting out of this crater created by the lockdowns and COVID will become even harder. So what does that kind of support entail? Well, government had provided a certain credit extension fund as part of the relief announcements in May. I think as and when the pandemic, if we start seeing sort of land, so to speak. I mean, right now we are all at sea and we don't see land, right? It seems as if the problem is going to go on. But as and when we start feeling that the land is in sight and the end is in sight of this health issue and pandemic, then government can come out with a second round of stimulus, because we had preserved our bullets. So there was a lot of criticism of India back in May and June that not enough has been done. But I think government wisely preserved its ammunition, and now they'll be in a better place to address the problems once we know that the health issues behind us. So these two, I think, are the issues that require immediate attention. I think the two slightly more longer term opportunities that are there are something which India has been working on as well for the last 3-4 years. So the first of those is digitalization. I think nothing has kind of become so viscerally felt in last 5-6 months. The effect of digital India, the effect of work from home, and even, for example, an event like this. Probably in normal times it would be a on-campus physical event, right? But here we are doing this as a webinar, and there's significant participation and things like that. And so many things have changed. People are realizing that many things they were doing offline can actually be done very well online in a more efficient way. And what India has actually built in the last 4 years, both on the private sector and the public side. So in the private sector now, we have companies, the telecom companies now offering some of the cheapest data access in the world. Combine that with what we have with India Stack. You combine that with what we have in the financial sort of access that we've built, and I think the pieces are in place to really take this to the next level. So you can combine Jan Dhan, Aadhaar, mobile, and then everyone had a bank account. Government has been able to deliver welfare, deliver cash transfers to the recipients, identified recipients directly. And then now the next level that we are talking about, if you follow some of the announcements coming from NPCI and RBI, is moving towards cash flow based lending. So in a world where obviously many of us have had the experience of running a small business, trying to get loans from banks, and banks want assets, and obviously small businesses do not have those kind of assets, but they do have cash flows because they're running businesses. So accessing credit based on cash flows is going to be a very big shift we'll see in India, and that is enabled by digitalization. And then even on the equity side, the rise of app-based sort of stock market access. So people are trading now on their phones. You're able to fund your brokerage account online. You're able to do eKYC online. So all of this is accelerating availability of capital, and I think it's a tremendously positive thing. And I think whatever can be done to sort of enhance this, government should take up. And I think digitalization will really be the centerpiece
Absolutely.
of what helps India come out of this. And the final part is on the manufacturing front. And a big piece of manufacturing, that sector is defense production. So in manufacturing, there have been fits and starts, right? So I would say of all the three areas, other areas I've talked about, manufacturing probably so far has been kind of least sort of exciting in that sense. But there were other challenges on that front. Probably, China was a serious competitor. It is also a kind of ally. Over the last few months, we realized maybe China is not such a close ally of India. Other countries too are reassessing the China relationship. So there is a push coming that countries want to diversify supply chains. India is well positioned to fulfill that for them. I think this is where we need to grab the opportunity and take the circumstances that are created by this pandemic and capitalize on them, so that those kind of
as an
labor
opportunity,
jobs that we need are able to be provided.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rajiv sir. I vividly recollect one of the statements which one of my economics professor 25 years back quoted. The government do not intervene in the economy any which ways. India is going to have 3% of GDP. So it is only about that 3% to 5% and 5% to 7%. I hope something the businesses will do even without thinking about the government intervention. I'm sure once the economy starts functioning well, automatically we will see the GDP going up. So I will control my emotions. I'm a moderator.
So, Dr. Thakkar, on a very lighter note, if the government does intervene, then the economy can fall down as well. So, and that's what has shown. So one has to be a bit cautious about that part.
No doubt. I mean, there is in fact, what we are actually asking is for government to step back, right? So the intervention, we already historically have had the government doing all kinds of things it should not be doing. So actually the ask is that we need to require the government to step back from economy.
Absolutely. Madhusudan sir, your takeaway, your opening notes?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for all the organizers. I hope I'm visible.
Absolutely, sir. Please
okay.
go ahead. Yeah.
Just 1 second. Yes. Okay. So first of all, I hope everybody who's tuning in today, their families are safe. And my commiserations for any person who's lost anybody. I think I'm myself down with fever right now, so I'll keep it short. I will just talk about one sector, real estate, because I think the presentations before me have been excellent and they've spoken about all the big issues. So I just want to speak about one kind of meta sector, real estate, and how that connects to this whole COVID thing and the economy bouncing back and potentially going to $5 trillion or not by 2025. So first of all, I'm a bit of a contrarian on the panel here. I do think that it is quite likely we will hit $5 trillion by the calendar year 2025 in GDP. But I think that's got to do more with what is likely to happen with the Indian rupee versus the dollar than any kind of double-digit real growth in Indian rupee terms itself. So I just want to make that caveat. I think the dollar had kind of a bearish phase from 2002 to 2011, and it had a bullish phase from 2011 to 2020. And now we are back in the dollar bearish phase. As an investor, as a author on finance books and stuff, I've written about this. And you can go and see my blog on Substack called Long India, longindia.substack.com. I don't want to bore you with numbers and presentations. I want to kind of speak only on very broad themes. And before I just continue, once again, this is also the book I wrote with Rajiv, A New Idea of India. I don't have the physical copy. It's coming next week. And we discuss a lot of things, including politics and economics in the book. So I don't think we should worry too much about the $5 trillion right now. Because it will become too technical and macroeconomic here. Let's think about what's the problem right now. The problem right now is that there is a massive fall in demand. Because by definition, people were locked down. Many people lost their jobs or their salaries were cut, and there is not enough demand. Even if they want to spend, many people cannot get out of their houses and go to a vacation, or I mean, some online buying is happening and so on and so forth. So demand is a big issue. Now, typically when demand goes down, conventional macroeconomics says you should have a massive stimulus, right? And a massive stimulus can be monetary or fiscal. Monetary happens through the central bank, fiscal happens through the government spending more than it taxes. As my co-author and friend Rajiv rightly mentioned, fiscal stimulus is likely to happen. I hope it happens. The government would be wrong if it goes towards any kind of austerity. But right now, I think the government's kind of waiting for the COVID death numbers to peak, which I think will likely peak around this month in terms of daily average of around 1,000 to 1,500 deaths. And it's likely to go down after that, however, very gradually. So the fiscal side is clear. What happens on the monetary side is because of the lockdown itself, there were a lot of supply side problems. Trucks couldn't cross borders and so on and so forth. Especially in terms of food prices, there was a spike. So what is known as the consumer price inflation increased a lot, but actually the wholesale price index, which is actually the real indicator of producer level inflation or industrial level inflation, is actually negative. So we have a strange situation where the intrinsic demand in the economy is very low, but because of the lockdown, there's a temporary spike in some prices, which forced the RBI to kind of pause on cutting in August. The next MPC meeting, new MPC meeting is in October, then December. Okay, so that's where we are. Now, how does real estate tie into all of this? I'll just talk about real estate and nothing else. Real estate ties in because real estate is one area where you can instantly boost demand. Right now, the average floating interest rate on a mortgage is around 7%, slightly more in India. And with an inflation target of 4% and global interest rates 0 or negative for developed economies, and the inflation being controlled over the last few years, this is simply not sustainable. We need lower interest rates in India. And what happens is in the short term, it's a bit of a political issue, because if you try to cut interest rates too aggressively, there are people who from a middle class or upper middle class background who say, well, what about senior citizens, right? What about deposit rates? Of course, most senior citizens don't have any money. India is still a poor country, $2,000 per capita income on average, and median is $1,000 per capita income. But people who we see and come across, they are more likely to come across in our mind. And therefore, we have no, we can't cut interest rates too much. We can't cut PPF or TF and all these rates too much. We are already cutting, but we need to cut them faster. What happens when somebody who is in his 20s or 30s, a boy or a girl, a young man or a woman, can, instead of renting, climb on the property ladder, give a small down payment? I think that 20% down payment needs to be reduced in India to around 10%. And the government needs to give massive tax incentives for people to buy houses and cars on mortgages, especially cheap cars. I'm not saying do it for luxury cars or 10 crore plus luxury flats, only for the middle class. Don't do it for the rich. We need these tax incentives time bound so people spend. We don't need tax cuts or tax increases. We need tax cuts only to spend. In fact, Maharashtra and Karnataka have also cut the property, the stamp duty taxes in the last 1 month or so that for the next, till December until March, so that people can go out and buy property. What happens when you buy real estate is a lot of people get jobs. Real estate is the instant multiplier for blue collar jobs. People come from villages, they work on the building, they get jobs. Unlike factories, even labor laws don't apply directly because all of them are under contractors. In the long run, we want labor laws to apply there, but in the short term, actually many jobs can be created. What happens is when the churn or the selling of the properties increases, the NPAs for banks and NBFCs go down. A lot of especially for NBFCs and housing finance companies and these mortgage lenders, a big problem is the huge amount of inventory, especially in Mumbai metropolitan region and national capital region. So we need the property inventory to go down, and the only way to do that is to decrease the interest rates, the mortgage cost, tax incentives, stamp duty cuts. And what that happens is, unlike till 2011, 12, 13, when India was there was a supply issue in India. Remember, 7-8 years ago, there were power cuts all the time. There was the slightest growth increase would boom inflation, not just CPI, but WPI. But for the last 6-7 years, we actually have had excess capacity. What that means is our industrial utilization is not 100% or 90% or 80%, is actually in the 70s. That is before COVID hit. So I think something that Rajiv kind of hinted at earlier, part of this is because a lot of Chinese dumping happened in the last 10-15 years. And so we need our trade policy for the next 5-7 years to be protectionist. Protectionist becomes a bad word. People say import substitution is a bad word, but we need to be tactically that for the next 5-7 years. But you know what manufacturing can never be imported? Real estate. Real estate is also manufacturing, right? You're building a house and you cannot import a house from China. So real estate is something where demand boom can happen, which in turn, what happens is if I buy a property on mortgage, I pay 10% down and the property prices start increasing, I have a wealth effect. I go out and buy other stuff. In turn, I buy cars and other, there's a loop and a positive spin-off effect. I am not saying we need to create a real estate bubble of prices. That is far away from right now. In fact, even if we try this time, the bubble will not be of prices, it will be of quantity. Why quantity? Because infrastructure is very much better compared to 10 years ago. People can live in suburbs, the quality of roads and highways are better. And if that was not enough, the final nail in the coffin for necessarily being in the downtown is the work from home phenomenon and digitalization that many speakers before have spoken of. So you can actually now imagine a situation where people who have blue collar jobs can actually own a 1 or 2 BHK for 30-35 lakh rupees by paying a down payment of 3-5-6 lakh rupees or even less. And they already have some affordable housing tax incentives. I think that along with slightly upper class people, but not the richest people, upper middle class people. So maybe not the luxury property in Mumbai, but let's say all of NCR. I think that will really kickstart the economy. What happens is we have a very moralistic view when we think about the economy. We psychologically say, oh my God, are you saying we should take debt? Are you saying we should have a bubble? You know, there is an element, I'm not against any religion or anything. There's an element of a Calvinist kind of self-flagellating that we should not have good times. And I think the government has done many reforms. I disagree. Reforms are not important right now. Of course, I'm not saying reforms should not happen or I will oppose it, but the government has actually done many reforms in the last 6 years. Right now, it's not about the reforms. Right now, it is about creating demand. And the most sustainable way of creating demand is giving short-term and medium-term incentives to buy real estate that will boom the economy. And about the $5 trillion, I'll just say the last thing, you need to grow about 12-13% in the next 5 years. That is a real GDP growth of 8% and inflation of 4% and the dollar not appreciating against the rupee. 8% of real GDP growth is 7% per capita and 1% population increase. Again, the numbers are there on my Long India Substack, but that is the trend growth you're already seeing. So there is a lot of pessimism in the commentary section, in the sell side section in economics and finance, but actually if you look at the buyers, the markets are not falling. Part of it is global liquidity, but then the global liquidity leads to an economic revival eventually. Ultimately they're linked. That's called reflexivity in the name of, in the concept of a famous investor. So I'll just conclude by saying, let us solve the financial sector problem. Let us solve the underutilization of capacity problem, and let us leverage digitalization by rapidly focusing on affordable and middle class housing through various incentives for the next 1 to 2 years. That is the most practical thing we can do, and we need to have an open mind towards it. Thank you.
Lovely words, Harsh sir. I just want you to unmute for a couple of minutes again. We all are learned enough to understand. We are economists, we have a financial background, but India, you will agree with my point. I know this is not question and answer, but the financial literacy is missing in India. That is the biggest challenge. What we say and what you say, it would be very much well connected to the audience, but we have the major chunk who is financial illiterate. How to handle that situation then?
I think it's an excellent question. I think financial literacy is one of the main issues that actually is kind of holding back financial intermediation in India. I think before I say that, let me first congratulate the housewives of India for being the best investors in the last 10 years by holding on to gold. I'm serious. But the change is that what is good in the past is not necessarily good in the future. Past is not prologue. Why is that? Because now we have inflation targeting. We've had a gold rally. So what we need is more financial savings. And I think literacy is definitely a big part of it. There are initiatives run out of people I know in Bombay and Pune. There's a FLAME initiative. But I think the real thing that will happen is another gentleman spoke about EdTech and FinTech. FinTech will be the big. What has happened with these Zero Dhas and the Paytms and their money apps is it becomes very easy. And Rajiv also mentioned the eKYC. to just do an SIP.
Yes.
So, and the mutual fund campaign happened, mutual fund sahi hai. Now, of course, mutual funds will never give you FD kind of stability. Otherwise, why will anybody invest in an FD? So mutual funds are always up and down. But I think your point is absolutely valid. I think we are making progress. I think the real progress will unfortunately not come from literacy per se, but simply access through technology. Same thing in education. And I'll just add one quick point because you added this. EdTech is important because again, our schools and colleges have many issues, except good colleges like yours and some national institutes. What has happened is there are problems with teacher unions, professor unions, and so on and so forth. Again, EdTech is the issue that will solve the problem. It will be difficult for politicians to actually take an unpopular decision about this. So while the valuations might not make sense to some people for Baiju and Unacademy and other eruditus education, etc., I think this gives me a lot of hope that with 4G and then 5G and the geo phenomenon and cheap smartphones, Indian parents and children who are very ambitious will actually get on the services job, because remember, manufacturing is required for the next 5, 7, 10 years, but eventually manufacturing will also be robotics. There is no substitute to being educated. So I'll just pause at that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your views. I will start with a question. The first question I want to take this with Dr. Rinda Madam, wherein she has huge experience into the banking sector as well. So Madam is highly optimistic, but my question right now is not so optimistic. Are we seeing the economic pandemic, not only in the Indian context, but again in the banking sector? Madam, over to you.
Okay, so give me a few minutes, please. Yes.
Absolutely.
The Indian economy had, like I said, the slowdown has begun even before the COVID crisis came in. So it was into a slowdown mood, but that is because we were changing a lot of gears. So we were doing a lot of cleaning up, and that is one thing. So naturally, the economy would have slowed down, but that would have created the basis for sustainable growth in the future. But the COVID crisis came in, and for example, the data which is being put out by CMIE says that the unemployment rate is now about 7%, which is against 24% in April. And pre-COVID also it was about 7 to 8%. And historically, I understand that about 6 to 7% unemployment is persistent in India. So therefore, this is one improvement. And there's another data point put out by Nomura, which says that there's an India Resurgent Index. This index was again 45 in April, and it is now 77. So clearly some things have happened. Clearly some things have happened to move the economy. The recovery will be slow, will be long, but we will get there. Let me just touch on a few points here. One is, was the capital raising. Now, banks there was a comment made that public sector banks are not bothered about capital raising, which is not correct. SBI, Bank of Baroda, PNB, they've all raised capital. And of course, the IDFC First Bank, ICICI Bank, they've also in the private sector banks have also raised capital. So banks are raising capital more as an insurance now. And then there was another statement made that 5 trillion, yes, we may not get by 25 because it would, so many unforeseen events have come in, but then we are on the right track. Somebody talked about privatization of banks being a panacea. I don't agree at all. Then why is it that in spite of 2%, 3% interest, why is it so much money is coming into the public sector banks? State Bank says, I don't want so much deposits, but everyone wants to go and put the money in State Bank of India. So privatization is not a panacea. What the solution is, I think, is governance, improvement in governance. The PJ Naik committee report is there. The RBI has recently put out a paper on governance. So I think that is the area, that is a route we should look at. We need to get into, somebody talked about COVID. Let me just touch it. Yes, could we have seen it coming? And, Corona will get over. The latest reports that are coming is that the Corona is coming back in a new form. It's a lot of people are seeing second lockdowns and second wave of Corona coming in. Yes. And now it is, I believe the new mutated version is affecting children more. So we really don't know whether it's being deliberate, whether it's being mutating naturally. I don't know. But the point is that it's not that as if that is all over and we can go business as usual. So never normal really is what we have to look at. And in this period, IT has done so well. So it's not as if IT and pharma are two industries which are really moving ahead. In IT digitization, that is going to be the way of the future. Yes, competitiveness is most important. Companies have moved away from China. For example, Apple has started production in Chennai. What is interesting is that Taiwan has moved its semiconductor productivity entirely from China into India to support Apple production. So we have things coming in, but yes, we have to improve our laws. Laws have changed. I mean, they have been, but we need to make it simpler. We need to make it easier. I think financial sector has seen a lot of reform. So now we need to look at the real sector, manufacturing, SMEs, MSMEs. This is the area I think where we need to focus on, which will lead to further growth in the economy, further impetus and multiplier effects. We need to focus on competitiveness and look at efficiency building. That is where if we have to compete globally and be in the global supply chain, we have to be competitive. There's no other way. A couple of points about this time, this demand has definitely shrunk. Now, incidentally, even in 2008, we had a demand shrinking, but then at that time, we didn't have a supply breakdown. Here, this time, we have a supply breakdown also. So there is no point in just pumping money into the hands of people without making sure that on the supply side, we're able to bring the economy back. And I think that is what the government is doing by giving incentives, measures, street vendors, MSMEs, whole agriculture, manufacturing, doing all this so that we have supply also back on track. And one point about real estate, yes, it's a very important sector. He talked about everything, cut prices, except cutting prices. Piyush Goyal has said, why don't you bring down, you've got so much inventory, just locked up with you. But they are not willing to reduce prices. And unless they just want interest rates to be cut, taxes to be cut, subsidies to be given, more and more incentives, people go and buy. Affordable housing is the one which will really bring in. And I think we need to talk about, for example, the IT parks. People are vacating. So because work from home is there, digitization, people can, work from smaller towns. So it's, so real estate really has to also do a little bit of introspection. And the last point I will make is about manufacturing and defense. Somebody talked about defense. Yes, because if we can make satellites, we can make, or everything, but missiles, but we can't make guns and rifles. We can't make that. We have to import it. That is because there has been a lot of built-in incentive, the negative incentives for this defense procurement. So I think now with coming in, the ordnance factories are being corporatized, and they're actually taking in the defense. They're actually taking in big consultants into this on the boards of these defense factories. So to give them advice on what needs to be done further. So I think with defense production, we will be, why should we be the largest importer, one of the largest importers of defense equipment when we can produce it in India? And manufacturing has also risen. They have responded brilliantly. There are car companies which say, okay, fine, we can't produce cars now, but let us manufacture the ventilators. So, this is what we had no PPE equipment manufacturing at all before COVID. Today, it's a 7,000 crore industry. So there is a lot of opportunity. We can't be doing business as usual. We can't be doing the same things. And we need to look at how we can improve our self-competitiveness and move forward.
Absolutely. My next question would be to Rakesh sir. But before that, again, Dr. Brinda madam, you're from banking and you're stalwart. I really want to ask you one question which is hitting my brain since long time now, since the time of demonetization. Is this again the cascading effect of the demonetization? The adversely affecting?
No, definitely not. I think that is behind it. That's over and done with. Demonetization was important because there were a lot of leakages. We need to get the informal system into the, how do we fight black money, money laundering? That is eating into the economy. That is eating into the vitals of the economy. So we have to fight with that. So I think demonetization did its bit, and that's over and done with. So it has nothing to do with demonetization. It is all to do with how we get back on track. Because remember, there's a lot of cleaning up going on. The IBC which has come in, earlier the borrowers who would not even return interest, now they come back and say, here is the interest, here is the principal, please take it. They are asking the banks to take back. So I think that the legal system, support from the legal system, which was missing earlier, is now coming in. So I think banking system, like I said, has moved way ahead. Wow, what we need to do is look at the changes in the real sector.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, madam. Rakesh, sir, one question I have is, are the investors risk averse or risk seeking in this last 5 months vis-a-vis the previous year?
I don't think investors are risk averse at this point of time. I mean, forget about the stock markets, because stock markets is a function of how much of money is getting pumped into because of the global liquidity and even the liquidity in the hands of probably some of the individuals. But if I look at the investors from a business perspective,
exactly.
I think I don't think they are risk averse thing. I'm sure they're willing to take risks. The question is, are we providing the right environment to them to be able to take the risks, right? Of course, demand is an issue which everybody has spoken about. But remember, in a manufacturing or a real sector, it takes a while to build up the capacities. So, and the capacities people will build only if they see that, the environment is right for them to invest. The government is offering a lot of incentives in the, electronic industry. So you are seeing a lot of investments. Now, people are talking about it. We will see how those investments really mature and come by. But I think the most important would be the environment, the right business environment. And I think one of the more important aspects from a business environment is really from the judicial reforms is also an extremely important aspect. I mean, people did speak about IBC. That's a great reform. But does it really take 365 days to over 2 years to solve an IBC issue, a company which has gone into liquidation? Are we, can anybody take the judiciary into literally, if I'm using a harsh word, into ransom by doing all sorts of things, and if we are not able to solve our all these contract disputes in time, people get extremely cagey, and there is no way the investors are going to put money.
Yeah, is this means that we talk a lot and we implement less?
Yeah, I think so, and I think it comes from probably a very a risk sort of a fierce sort of a mind from whoever is involved, whether the regulators or the judiciary or whatever it is. I mean, if you really relook at some of the disputes which are happening right now, is that the area where the judiciary should really get into? I mean, this is a reform on the recently happening, and I don't want to talk about a Supreme Court case and all that sort of stuff, but it really somebody, judiciary also has to figure out where they want to get into the commercial disputes and where they don't want to get into the commercial disputes of the businesses. I think that's going to be extremely important.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Arun sir, your take on this, the investment side of the companies?
So I would say that at least in some of our sort of segments that we serve as a larger IT and telecoms industry, there are investments being made specifically in the areas of digital transformation. Because, as some of the earlier esteemed speakers alluded to the fact that, you need to sort of invest in technology to some extent, digitalize and find new ways of doing things. So in response to that, see, those investments were happening earlier too, but some of them have got accelerated. So for example, if even prior to the COVID-19 strike, there were a fair amount of investments being made in technology to improve customer experience, so-called CX.
Yes.
Travel, tourism, hospitality, or you take any service industry, banking, for example, there was a lot of investment going in digital technologies to improve overall customer experience, to automate stuff, and every time you had a moment of truth with the customer, how did you make it seamless and all that kind of stuff. Now, obviously, some of those industries have, gotten into tough times. But even in those scenarios, they're now sort of investing still investing in technology, but maybe in different areas. For example, in assurance, customer assurance. So how do, since a lot of the physical aspects of the business have been broken by this instance, how do you then virtualize those instances? How do you digitalize those instances and yet maintain a high sort of customer level satisfaction? So that's one. Or even in manufacturing, for example, there were investments already happening. So people were, even people who were producing products, they were products companies, they were manufacturing companies, they were investing in technologies to look at how they enhance the overall customer experience of the end customer dealing with their company and the product. So, right from how they look for the product, feel the product, how they get sold, how they are, get the thing delivered, and what is their experience in terms of feature functionality of the product over the lifetime of that. So they were looking at more the lifetime value of the customer rather than selling a product one time. Now, again, some of those initiatives have got enhanced in terms of using technology to leverage some of those aspects of customer interactions and customer satisfaction. So we continue to see that happen. And like I said, in three areas that I pointed out, EdTech, which is EduTech, FinTech, and also health tech, there has been a big uptake of technology. I mean, look at health tech, for example. The whole experience of getting healthcare the interaction in a digital form. No, of course, there are elements of every interaction where if a doctor needs to see you and examine you physically, that has to happen, right? But look at apps like Arogya Setu, for example. Or I can relate even with my own personal example. So I'm sorry, first of all, sorry for the funky background. I'm using my 10-year-old son's room today, so the funky background. So I have a 10-year-old son, and he has a medical condition which requires that, the doctor, we have to consult the doctor every 6 months, and that's a given. Now, obviously, pre-COVID, it was easy. You took an appointment, we went there, and it was face to face. But obviously, in the COVID situation, we've been locked out, and you don't want to go to a hospital, right? In this scenario, unless it is totally necessary. So you don't want to risk your family and your child taking him to a doctor, and you have to go to a clinic or a hospital, a large hospital, and you don't want to be doing that unless you can avoid it. So now you have everything. You take an appointment. You can do it on the app. You can load all the previous medical records there. The doctor comes on that the video conference. He has access to all the previous history. He recalls, because he has seen you earlier, and then he can prescribe the next course. So anything which is short of actual physical examination is possible, and that's been made possible because investments have been made in the right technologies in those areas. So that will continue to happen. I think in my opinion, we are seeing three things happen here in this space. So the investment is, of course, one part of it, but there are other sort of things, other factors that come into play. So first is that there is more focus on now qualitative growth rather than quantitative growth. What that might mean is, previously there was a lot of chasing of the top line. So especially in the startup sector, scale up, grow at any cost, even if you're making a loss. Now, I think some of that thinking has changed. Even in the startup sector, they're saying, okay, maybe we don't chase the top line, but I'll look for actual profits. And that is what a business is all about, right? At the end of the day. So qualitative growth over quantitative. Secondly, people are coming to realize, and everyone says so in the leadership, but now is the time where rubber really hits the road, is that people are your greatest asset. People are your greatest asset. And this is true, my friends. So keeping employee morale high is another factor. And we know that it is so tough in these times. So many jobs are being lost. It's, how do you uplift the morale of a person who's just received a pink slip? And the ones that are left behind, those have not lost their jobs, but they've seen their colleagues who have worked with them, right, sitting next to them for years together, they are gone. So it affects the ones those are left behind as well. So you have to sort of keep the morale high, and that's not easy. And even in these times, retaining top talent is a very top priority. It is the topmost priority. In these tough times where you are having to let go large, significant portions of your workforce, you still want to hold on to your top talent because they're critical to your business. So that is the other factor. The last factor, but not the least, is everyone has touched upon it, is innovation. Innovation to survive. Now, and the notion of innovation is that it happens in large labs and it is generally focused on how new products, breakthrough technology. No, innovation can come in many forms. There are various dimensions of innovation, especially in the business sense. So yes, it could be around your products and offerings and how do you imbue those with better features, functionality, etc. But innovation can also happen in what is the customer experience you deliver, what is the value captured that you derive from your existing set of customers, and probably open new vistas of revenues by tweaking a few things in your processes, in your business models. Can you capture more from your set of customers, maybe acquire a new customer segment altogether, or discover an unmet need in the existing segment and serve that well? Or can you do that by changing the structure of your organization? Can you do that by changing your supply chain logistics, by your supply chain relationships, for example? Can you do that? Can you do that by better networking, by leveraging your brand better? So there are various dimensions of innovation that are possible. And we are seeing that in these times when people are forced to rethink stuff, they sort of get out of the old mode and say, what do we do now to survive? And this is when innovation is sparked off, sometimes by necessity itself. So we are seeing all those factors coming into play. Investment, of course, is a big factor of it, but it is not the only factor in play, if I may say so. That's my answer.
Golden words from a great leader.
Thank you.
So it's really nice to hear you, sir. I have one thing in my mind. Rajiv, sir, can you get connected? Wherein this is a question, I just want to ask this question because one of the student participant, Utkar Shivastav, has raised this question, and I have been thinking that there has always been a tussle between India and China for last many years. During the COVID, it's like too much. Is it blessing in disguise right now for being Atmanirbhar?
So I think if India makes the right moves and makes the right changes, then it will be a blessing in disguise. It all depends on the actions, right? What path we take. So if the actions are in the right direction, then it will be a blessing in disguise. And I will also say that sometimes, governments are not able to move in the right direction because there are too many interest groups blocking the change. Now, in a situation like this, what happens is that because of the external kind of exigency, those interest groups fall away.
Yes.
So today, if someone says, let's say 2-3 years ago, someone had tried in the government to say that we should do, XYZ for electronics manufacturing, or we need to address labor laws because it is hurting our manufacturing, and so on. So those kind of changes would have invited a pushback.
Absolutely, yeah.
But in the present context, if because there is a kind of an external threat, so government has a slightly freer hand. Government can say, wait, we need to do this because there is a challenge, and this is important.
Absolutely. Rakesh sir, are we ready for this Atmanirbhar? Are the citizens of India ready? Is the government ready?
Tough one. I don't know about the citizens of India, are we ready? But I think the government is trying to make it all its effort to get it there. I think Atmanirbhar also doesn't mean that we should do everything in India. I think what it really makes is we should be a bit more resilient in the things. We should be able to get our businesses running again. And I think if we just to add a little bit on the people have spoken about on the MSME segment and all that. I think we also need to make sure that sector becomes a bit more efficient and improves its productivity. And I think some of the laws are probably inhibiting them from their growth and unshackling their animal spirits of the entrepreneurs there. But I think that in area can be a huge, an employment generation arena, and somewhere we'll have to figure out how to, make sure that those small enterprises become bigger, by generating, more employment to the people, because that's, and the other part which I would also think is that we can't really concentrate all our economic activities around 10 cities and a few states.
Absolutely.
We will have to make sure that, it is far more widespread. It spreads out even to the rural areas. And there was where I was earlier saying that, the center can make the best of the policies, but if the states don't have the intent and don't have the financial resources to implement them, then our things will never happen, our economy will never improve.
Okay. Dr. Brinda Madam, well, once again, the same question, will this be helping us to reach to that 5 trillion? And I'm very much optimistic like you are. I'm thinking of 10 trillion in next 10 years time. So will this Atmanirbhar and self-sufficiency will help us as an Indian economy?
First of all, Atmanirbhar is not self-sufficiency, it is self-reliance. So self-sufficiency means we have everything and this is all, we don't need anything from outside. No, we do need things from outside, and we need to also give our things to the outside world. So we definitely need trade. But Atmanirbhar is, and I would say this is a very good opportunity, very good. Your question was whether it's a yes or no, and I would say yes. Because this is also a time, it's not just the government doing, it's the citizens now who say we don't want this. So that pushback is coming from the citizens, and that is what is going to make this adventure, this initiative successful. Yes, we do need judicial reforms and innovation. Those are very, very critical for becoming Atmanirbhar. And but size, the incentive has always been to remain small. Now, of course, the definition of micro, etc., has been widened a bit. But the average size of a textile unit in India would be, say, 50 people, employing 50 people. While in China, it would be 500 people. So this gives them the advantage of economies of scale and economies of scope. So we should allow that. We should allow the industry to grow and not hinder investment. Let them proceed. Why are investors preferring to go to Bangladesh and Vietnam and not come to India when we have a long history in textiles, etc., history and experience? So we have to make our laws compatible with what we want to do and make it easier for businesses to grow, thrive, and live in India. So Atmanirbhar, I would say it's a very good opportunity. This time course correction has come really at the right time, which will help us to grow. And 10 trillion, it's so interesting to talk about 10 trillion, because I read a recent report by, I think it was PwC, I can't remember. They are talking about 10 trillion by 2034. So we can do it. It's a possibility. But yes, but we need to get our house in order first, whether it's our laws, whether it's our quality, whether it's our people, whether it's our skills, efficiency, innovation, reforms. We need to do all these together, and we need to do them quickly.
Please do not switch off your camera. One more point here I want to talk about. You spoke about China. The China is predominantly looking into the economies of scale. But when you talk about Indian economy, we have too much of supply chain. So if we have a lot of production in India itself, can we say that there would be a lot of pricing and there would be a lot of inflation in Indian context? Dr. Brinda, madam, for you, yeah.
So you're asking whether there would be inflation?
Yeah, because China is looking always into the economies of scale, and India have a long chain of supply chain, and is because of Atmanirbhar, will we have more of inflation?
The supply chain is being cut. The farmers can directly sell to the consumer. So we don't have that whole long chain of intermediaries. We don't have to go to the APMC market and then to the other contractors and then come on. So that is already being cut. So that is what will help inflation. And not only that, somebody spoke of innovation in so many ways. If you go to the net, there are people who are small manufacturers. Either they are on platforms or they have their own site, whether they're clothes, fashion, products, whatever. So everything is being sold directly. So it's not necessary. Atmanirbhar is not inflationary. Atmanirbhar, in fact, is the opposite of inflation.
Okay. Madhusudan sir, please, over to you. I want quick points from your end.
I agree with a lot that all the panelists have said. I would simply say that once again, it's very important that we do not get lost in the long-term policy recommendations, which are absolutely important, and focus on the short term, because I think right now we are at a very critical point where we need to get the growth back up. And I think once it is up, it's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's a virtuous cycle. And what I'm really concerned is for the government to get conflicting advice, let's say from the former central banker like Viral Acharya, who said there should be a fiscal council and we should have the FRBM, and we should be worried about our debt being downgraded by the rating agencies and so on and so forth. I'm very worried that these kind of opinions will carry the day in Delhi. I'm not counting on it. I'm optimistic, but I'm worried they'll carry the day, because the only thing that can save the Indian growth story is growth. If you have growth, even the debt to GDP ratio will normalize. We have to understand that in the US, in the Second World War, the debt to GDP ratio went above 100%. And very slowly kind of came down over the next few decades, and now it's gone up again. This is nothing short of a once a century war kind of situation. Conventional metrics on fiscal consolidation will harm us a lot. We have to be very careful in the short term of not going for any kind of relative austerity. I don't think anybody's even talking about absolute austerity. So I think that is what I'm really worried about, because I think the other things that the panelists are saying are absolutely crucial and important, but from a medium to long term point of view. And right now, what I'm worried about is if we do not press on the demand accelerator very hard, that is when we could actually lose a year. Otherwise, we could have a V-shaped recovery. Last fiscal year, our nominal GDP was 200 lakh crores. Let us say it's a bit slightly less than that because of inflation, but there's degrowth of 8.97%. I think some of the estimates are too pessimistic. Quarter one was minus 24%. I don't think the October to December quarter will be very negative, and January to March quarter could even be positive. So I think on the whole, I'm not. But what I'm really worried is if the government does not, first of all, release money to contractors in infrastructure, to PSUs, to power companies, tax refunds. Government has to release money. It should not be shy about the RBI monetizing the debt, whether it is through the primary market or the secondary market. This is once a century event, and doing that does not make us irresponsible. I think that is the key message the policymakers need to worry about. I think the other things will fall in place.
Absolutely. And I guess you will agree with my point. Even the dollar, once the dollar is weaker and the Indian rupee is stronger, we will have external positive impact. Your take on that? Madhusudan sir.
I'm sorry, I missed the question about the dollar.
As we were talking initially, if the dollar decreases and the rupee is stronger, it will have a very good impact on the Indian economy without government making much of the provisions.
That's a very tricky topic. You're right in the medium to long term, but in the short term, I would highly recommend the government does not let the rupee appreciate too much. I think they should build the foreign exchange reserves. They should not let it go below 73 or so. I think a lot of economists have mentioned that, when you're trying to kick back growth, especially some kind of exports or at least substitute imports, having a lower real or nominal currency helps. I can name many economists about that, but I think the main thing is in the short term. So for example, we built up around $60 to $70 billion of foreign exchange reserves in the last 4-5 months. So we are around $550 billion, give or take. And I think I wrote an article in Mint just 3-4 days ago that we should aim for capital account convertibility for the students. That is basically allowing Indians and foreigners to take out money and take in money. Right now there's a liberalized remittance scheme of $250,000 per person per year, so on and so forth. And even the foreigners are not allowed to invest beyond the limit in our sovereign debt. And so although those limits are right now not utilized, I think we have to gradually say by 2025, we have to have an open capital account. An open capital account will help us a lot to boost demand and growth. See, remember, when you're trying to lay highways, I think there's an excellent point made by one gentleman about broad-basing growth beyond main cities, say Pune, Mumbai, Calcutta, Bangalore. I think the most dense population in India is in the Gangetic Valley, right? UP and Bihar. They have around 350 million people together, more than 1,500 square people per square kilometer. That's more than the density of the greater New York City area. And it has some of the worst infrastructure in the world, especially Bihar. The dollar spent on infrastructure in the Gangetic Plains will have a much higher multiplier effect than it will have in rest of India and definitely in China or America, Europe. So right now we need foreign capital to lay out massive highways, expressways, metro stations, including social infrastructure, health and education. And the way to do that is to make sure that capital can flow into India without the Indian currency getting overheated. And for that, it will have to be a balancing act by the RBI. For right now, for example, what happened is in August, they did not cut rates and they let the rupee rise up by 2 rupees, saying that will control inflation. But rupee rising controls inflation very little. It's a very indirect effect. What is more important is our exporters need to know that they have some way to go and compete in the markets. A lot of people mention about Bangladesh and Vietnam. Bangladesh and Vietnam have policy and tariff preferences with the European Union and other places for textile exports. We don't have it. The GSP and other textile preferences. So again, once again, labor laws are required, reforms are required. It is being done by the parliament. They're being consolidated into 3 acts, but that will not bring the textile sector back because if you don't have a trade relationship. So I think what we need to do is we need to have trade deals with China, with the European Union and America and Canada and Australia, the Western countries and Japan. And we need to make sure we never make the mistake of joining RCEP, which is a Chinese-led free trade deal in Asia Pacific. So I think I agree with the other panelists that Atmanirbhar is not about being self-sufficient. It is about being self-reliant. Trade is very important, but we need to make sure we trade with people who are geopolitically friendly towards us and not necessarily with people who we have a border war with. And as it so happens, that country also has excess capacity, which is jumping on our sectors from steel to tires to asbestos to housing appliance, everything. So we need to be, when we think of import substitution and trade, we are not going autarkic. We are not saying stop trading the world. The real country we need to deal with problematically here is China. The rest of trade with the global West and Japan is not a problem at all. So once again, we need a capital account and we need free trade, but not with China. How we do that in a democratic setup and in a global institutional setup, those are the challenges for the policymakers. Absolutely. But in the short term, we need demand more than anything else.
Thank you so much for your take on this. Rakesh sir, over to you. I have a question. Constantly, the COVID-19 has been called as the black swan, but I'm sure it's not because already we have had the SARS in 2002. And still then, if you look at the Chinese market, yesterday's statistics says they have not even crossed 90,000 mark for the entire season. But India, why these controlling measures were not so much implemented? We were still not thinking that it was coming, but again, we should have made some kind of provisions for these things, kind of pandemic like SARS, COVID.
I guess my understanding of the whole situation is that since we never faced a situation like SARS earlier, not to that extent, right? I mean, we did have some issues of swine flu happening on and off, so on and so forth. We were never fully prepared for such an event. Whereas probably China and Southeast Asia countries, which had got impacted through SARS and other such, epidemics in the past, they were a bit more prepared. Plus, our health infrastructure is nothing to write home about, right? So how do you ever get such a large population, or prepare for such a pandemic for such a large population with almost negligible health infrastructure in the rural area? I mean, the pandemic has also proved that our cities are probably no good from a health infrastructure perspective. In fact, it has proved that even the United States are probably is not very good from a health infrastructure perspective to manage such pandemics. So I guess the government initially just was hoping that nothing would happen, but when it really reached somewhere, my take of the entire lockdown initially is that they had to lock down to make sure that the health infrastructure of the states at least start implementing a little bit of the health infrastructure. Otherwise, that would have been a far more, devastating effect from a fatalities perspective. That's my take on the whole thing.
Absolutely, sir. Dr. Brinda, madam, over to you. One question I have, I will ask this question, the last question from me, and then I will open the forum. There are many of our participants want to have interactions with you all. What would be the 3 pointers? I'm not talking about the banking sector. I'm talking about the Indian per se. What are the 3 pointers according to you should be laid down to have the economy growing? The 3 pointers.
Okay. One, I would say judicial reforms. Somebody mentioned here, and I would completely agree. Judicial reforms is first because we need an enabling environment to be in place. So the laws and the judiciary, the cleaning up on that side. That is one. The second, I would say, is innovation. It's very, very important. Let people think. And I think the new education policy and the skill development are really steps in those directions because people need to think first. We can't just tell them this is it and, this is what happened in history. And, so we need to allow them to think. And innovation is very, very important. And the third thing I would say is manufacturing, MSME and manufacturing. Agriculture is already on board. So agriculture is it's already started. But I think on MSME and manufacturing sector, that is very critical for growth to go forward.
Okay, thank you so much. I will take this same question to Arun sir. The top 3 pointers, what you think?
Is that for me or
yes, Arun sir?
Sorry, Arun.
Yeah. Arun sir, can you hear me?
Sorry, was there a question for me?
Yes, sir. The question, am I audible, sir?
Yes.
Yeah, your 3 top pointers wherein we can overcome as a developed nation and we will overcome as a big economy. The top 3 pointers, as according to you.
Sure. So, based on our experience with dealing with the enterprise industry by and large, I would say first is improve operational efficiency. I think, that was always a good practice in any economy. But I think in these current times, it has become a byword for survival. Improving the operational efficiency is important. I would say investing in the right areas that make sense for the end user in mind, whoever that might be. Whether you're in banking, you're in public sector, private sector, you have to keep front and center who would be the final point in the chain who will be either using the product or the service or offering whatever you may call it, even policy, for example, and what is the dire need and how will that help the absolute end user. So I'm, sort of laying it in very, very large terms. It could be anything. But you have to have front and center what will be the end user and what are the dire needs there. So that is second for me. And I think overall, since we are not an island in terms of an economy, right? So as someone said, this is a global economy. It will continue to be a global economy. So I think in a global economy, you have to find your own right place. And I think in that, like someone said, trade is important. So, the idea is to not be self-sufficient. You cannot be self-sufficient. It was to be self-reliant. And if you have to do that, then you have to probably concentrate somewhat in these times in the whole, supply chain relationships, I would say. Logistics are there, but the relationships. I think in these times, you have to build an ecosystem of partners whom you can rely on in adverse times, who are willing to go beyond what is written in the contract, who are willing to come and collaborate with you and co-create with you. So we have to look out for such partnerships, whether it is partnerships with other nations, other industries, other companies. You can take it right from the macro level to the most micro levels. So I think relationships, ecosystem build-ups, those are going to be important. So those are the 3 for now.
Thank you so much, Arun sir. Dr. Rashmi madam, I will open the forum for the students. Maximum 3 questions we can have. We are short of time. So,
let me unmute, sir, to all the students and those who have given the questions in advance. They can ask.
yeah, directly they can ask the questions.
Anybody on the platform, friends, those who have shared the questions, kindly ask questions to the respective panel members.
Hello.
Yes, Siddhant, go ahead.
Good morning, ma'am. Good morning, sir. Good morning, everyone. My question was, it is for all the panelists and everyone. Was there a real need to open the economy all at once, or could the government have done it in segments? Because ever since the reopening happened, there has been a lot of haywire going on in the economy. So, yes, could you please elaborate and tell me more about it?
Ma'am, unmute. Kindly unmute.
This is a really difficult question because it's the question of lives versus livelihoods. So that issue, when they closed down early, they said lockdown is too severe, and so open, and when they opened it up, they said no, now it's too severe. The virus hasn't gone anywhere. In fact, it's coming back in a more vicious form. So it's a very tough question. I don't think I have an answer. We need to take our precautions, but at the same time, life has to go on. We can't always be sitting in one place. We can do a lot over the net, of course, but I think we need to put standard operating procedures in place, open up our manufacturing, open up our offices, and in a gradual, limited way. It can't be business as usual. We can't open up our theaters and pubs and gyms and things like that. But yes, it's very difficult to answer. It's lives versus livelihoods.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
So may I?
Yeah, please go ahead, Vishal.
Yes, ma'am. So actually my question was not related exactly to the topic that has been going on. There is something on the lines of implementation that was a part of this topic. So what I wanted to ask is that there is a new education policy that has been brought in by the government as of now, and it's very impressive as of what I feel now. But the thing is that if it's if the implementation is a problem, and if that is going to be the problem, so will it deteriorate the present condition of education in India? Or if not, then how should the government go about in terms of bettering its implementation part?
Vishal, you want a specific panel member to answer? It's open to anyone.
No, ma'am, it's open to anyone.
I would request Rakesh sir to answer, if at all you could, sir.
I'm no expert on the education policy, but I guess efforts have to be made, and it's right. I mean, the implementation has to be extremely good. I only hope that it doesn't fall between the politics, between the various political parties, and doesn't see the light of the day. But education reforms is a must. Education policy needs to change. Our ability, I think the emphasis on vocational training is extremely important. In fact, I was reading somewhere that even Mahatma Gandhi, way back in the 1930s, have very clearly articulated that vocational training is a must, for people to gain employment. So I think the emphasis on those things, skilling, vocational training, etc., is extremely important. But I think the more important part would be to really figure out how the implementation of the schools or the education system in the rural areas come about. I somehow feel that this pandemic has increased the gap between the rural sector and the urban. We all who live in big cities have access to good network and good all the other infrastructure. And I'm not too sure how people or students in the villages are faring these times. So this gap, apart from all the sorts of policy changes, I think this gap will also needs to be addressed very seriously by the authorities.
Thank you so much, sir. It was really exactly what I wanted to hear and I wanted to know about. Just a follow-up question to that: if the implementation is not good, like it has been for most of the incidents that have been happening in the country, so are there any chances that it will deteriorate the situation of education literacy in the country which is at present?
I only hope not, Vishal. We all live in hopes, and I hope that the situation doesn't deteriorate, and we all, as individuals, including the authorities, make that effort that the system only improves.
Thank you so much, sir. Yeah.
Good morning. May I ask a question?
Yes, Rahil. This would be the last question, Rahil, I would be taking.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, go ahead.
Good morning, ma'am. Ma'am, my question is addressed to both Brinda ma'am as well as Harsh sir. Brinda ma'am, you said that as far as public sector banks are concerned, privatization is not the answer, but rather better governance is the way ahead. Ma'am, but in general, won't privatization ensure better governance? I would also like to hear Harsh sir's views on this after Brinda ma'am, of course. Thank you.
So you can see very clearly, I don't want to mention any private sector bank names, but you can see very clearly what their level of governance has been there. That's why I'm saying again and again that, and look, the financial inclusion that has expanded is because of the private public sector banks. So we need to get more people into the system. We need to get more savings into the financial savings. So therefore, we need more geographies. People to be present in banks to be present in remote areas. You don't see private sector banks there. You see public sector banks. Look at the Northeast, for example. The development is all because of the public sector banks. So the public sector banks have achieved a lot since 1969. What we need to do is really improve our efficiencies and become, and corporate governance. I think that is the key. So again, I will come back to saying that privatization is no answer. We've seen everything in the public sector, in the private sector too. So therefore, just relying blindly on, in fact, what happened during the global financial crisis, globally, all the banks became, they had to be taken over by the governments. So therefore, the government support for public sector banks is something which has given them confidence to grow and help and support the economy. And for financial inclusion, I think they've played a very critical part. And we cannot grow only in one area. We can't grow just with the cities. As several of my panelists have mentioned, that we need to have growth widespread, across sectors, across geographies. And the latest announcement is that priority sector, the definition of the priority sector has been expanded, and even lending to areas where the credit growth is low, that will also be considered as priority sector lending. So we need to have we definitely want public sector banks to stay there, but for the country to have a strong financial sector, we need both public sector and private sector. But the critical thing is to have a good governance in every sector.
I'll agree with ma'am that actually over time it was critical for financial inclusion in the 70s and 80s. We don't know, we can't do counterfactuals what would have happened with private sector banks. Maybe we could have put regulatory mandates on them to have some section of loans to the village areas, and while being in the private sector we could have done that. But there's no doubt that in the first couple of decades there was a massive expansion of credit. However, having said that, I do think that at this point, sitting in 2020, I see there is less value for public sector banks. And I think governance, there have been many committees, there have been reports. I have also spoken with the finance minister on this issue through a proper structured forum. And I think that going forward, they try to have a chief risk officer with market salaries in one of the announcements they made a few months ago. But for example, what about chief income? What about chief executive officer? What about the number 2, number 3, number 4 guys? You cannot have 10, 20, 100 crore kind of salaries in private sector banks and very low salaries in public sector banks. And if you do, because they're basically government institutions, you will have either crony lending or corruption, which is what happened till a few years ago, or you will have a complete stoppage of credit because people say, I don't want to sign off on any loan. I don't want any risk on my personal file. And I think that is what we are seeing right now with public sector banks. Another thing to say in defense of public sector banks, before I argue for privatization, is they were critical for infrastructure lending. However, what has happened now is we have this new mechanism of InvITs, investment infrastructure trusts, along with the real estate investment trusts. We already have 2 listed InvITs and many more unlisted InvITs. We also have REITs. And the government has just announced last week they'll go to the DFI model, a development financial institution model. So I think going forward, because of the inefficiencies, which you can put technology, you can increase the size and all that, but fundamentally the person at the top or the team at the top is not incentivized to make it efficient. And how do you, I mean, it's basically a question of human incentives. It's not that the people on the top are not good. The same people in a private sector bank setting will be excellent. So it's not the people are not good. It's the question of incentives. So if we do want to keep them in public sector, one halfway solution could be to have kind of a sovereign wealth fund domestically to own these private public sector banks and let them set up kind of through their board of directors the market-based salaries. So that could be a halfway solution where the equity remains. For example, Singapore, GIC, and Temasek, they all own a lot of companies, right? But the salaries of these companies and the holding companies are market-based. So we can do something halfway without fully privatizing, but I think in the long run, we definitely need to give some equity capital. Right now, bank consolidation is happening. I think in the long run, we need more bank competition. And if we do get good prices, if the stock market goes up for the public sector bank shares, I think it would be smart to at least privatize a few of them. We should not miss that opportunity. So I know it's a very nuanced view. It's not completely for or against, but that's how I would see it. Thank you.
Can I comment on this? Just one point to add. Ma'am had mentioned what happened to the private sector bank. And, probably we all know the name of the bank that got into trouble. But I will also point out that we should look at what happened to the chief executive of that bank. And what has happened to the chief executives of all the PSU banks that have gone bankrupt. The government is asked to bail them out repeatedly. But do we know the names of the PSU bank chiefs? They've all retired. There is no accountability. Whereas in the private sector, the person who did those malpractices is in deep trouble today. He's facing the consequences. So that alignment of incentives that comes with privatization, I think, is very important.
I'll just add here 1 minute that the public sector banks are also under the CBC, the CBI, and the Chief Vigilance, etc. So a lot of people have suffered under this, and they've either lost their pensions, lost their seniority, gone to jail. So they have all suffered under the CBI also. So it's not as if they've gone away completely. But yes, I agree. Accountability is the most important factor, and in the public sector banks, that needs to be enhanced. And there's something interestingly. In the public sector, there's something called a chief ethics officer. State Bank of India is the first bank to have a chief ethics officer. I don't think any other bank has it yet.
Okay.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Hemant sir, your closing remarks so that we can close now.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, all the honorable panelists. This topic will keep on going on and on. And this is a very hot topic, not only for us, for the entire nation. And the entire world is looking at Indian economy, whether we will have that V-shape recovery. Everyone is focusing on that. Thank you so much for all your time. Really, we are honored to hear you all. All the participants have taken a lot of inputs from your end. Thank you so much from my end. And over to you, Dr. Rashmi More.
Palak.
Thank you so much. It was a wonderful opportunity to have amongst us the industry's experts sharing their views. I believe our student managers and my fellow friends have gained insight and look forward to revival of our dynamic economy achieving the target of $5 trillion by 2025. I request Dr. Rashmi More to give the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Palak. Respected dignitaries, respected director sir, faculty members, and dear student managers. It's my privilege to deliver a brief vote of thanks. The Stratagem panel discussion has become one of our signature events, and believe that it is important to have such platform where industry stalwarts can gather and share their insights on the contemporary issues. The topic deliberated today has far-reaching implications, and we all are a part of the economy downturn, and also will be part of economy revival as well. On behalf of Symbiosis Institute of Management Studies, I extend a very hearty vote of thanks to all the dignitary guests for giving us their valuable time out of their busy schedule and gracing us with their presence today. I also would like to thank our director, sir, for his constant support to make this event a success. Further, I extend my heartfelt thanks to our student managers of Infinite Club for transferring their innovative ideas for such far-sighted event. Finally, Last but not the least, our faculty members, staff for their continuous support, admin department, especially IT department for making this event a success. And last but not the least, all the student managers for their presence in time and being the patient listeners. Thank you so much, all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.